On December 3, 1973, a single trucker named J.W. Edwards pulled onto Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania and ignited a nationwide shutdown that forced 9 state governors to call out the National Guard. That crisis was triggered by fuel prices. Fast forward to today. 30,000 jobs erased with yellow corporations' collapse. 2,600 more drivers phased out by 2026, and a quiet unraveling spreading across 10 states. History does not repeat exactly, but the men who drive these roads know what the early signs look like. Between 2019 and mid-2023, trucking shed 37,500 jobs. During that same period, total U.S. employment grew by 4.5 million. The economy expanded. Trucking contracted. An industry-specific collapse hidden inside broader growth. In 2023 alone, nearly 35,000 trucking companies left the market, a 25% jump from 28,000 exits the year before. Not a gradual decline. Accelerating demolition. 10 states are witnessing this collapse from the cab. The patterns vary. The outcome doesn't. Loads vanish. Terminals close. Drivers who survived recessions and fuel crises watch their industry hollow out. During the 2008 recession, for-hire tonnage dropped more than 14%, far steeper than manufacturing or retail. Trucking amplifies economic pain. It always has. In one state, a single bankruptcy erased 12% of an entire market segment overnight. The question isn't whether this continues. New Mexico, the USPS Contractor Vanishing Act. New Mexico's collapse doesn't look like a collapse at all. Letters arrive. Packages reach doorsteps. The Postal Service functions exactly as it did a year ago. But 2,600 drivers who move that mail are disappearing. 10 Roads Express, a major USPS highway contractor, is phasing out its entire driver workforce by early 2026. 2,400 trucks, 2,600 jobs, gone. The company hauls mail across long-haul routes connecting distribution hubs, the invisible arteries that keep the system alive. Yet when it shuts down, mail delivery doesn't pause for a single day. The Postal Service spreads contracts across multiple carriers deliberately. Redundancy by design. If one contractor fails, another absorbs the routes. Consumers never notice. The system cushions the shock perfectly, for everyone except the drivers who lose their routes. For truckers, the paradox is visceral. The work still exists. Someone still hauls those mail trailers across Interstate 40 from Albuquerque to Amarillo. But the company that paid them to do it no longer operates. New Mexico's geography makes this especially painful. Vast distances between population centers, limited alternative freight, routes that depend on federal contracts. In rural communities tied to a single contractor, the impact concentrates. When 10 Roads Express phases out operations, those 2,600 drivers don't just lose jobs, they lose the only trucking work within 100 miles. The infrastructure remains, the demand remains. The human workforce simply vanishes, replaced by drivers from the next contractor in line. This is the quiet collapse. Arizona, overcapacity in the desert corridor. Why do truckers report vanishing work while economists document a driver shortage? Arizona sits at the intersection of two critical freight corridors, Interstate 10 connecting California to Texas, and Interstate 40 linking the Southwest to the Midwest. Between 2020 and 2021, those routes saw explosive growth. Pandemic demand surged. Small carriers and owner-operators flooded the market. Spot rates hit record highs. Everyone wanted in. Then demand normalized. Capacity didn't. Too many trucks chasing too few loads. Spot rates collapsed. Routes that paid $3,000 in 2021 now offer $1,800 for the same haul. Arizona truckers witness the consequences daily. Loads from Ontario, California to Phoenix that sustained small fleets for decades simply vanish. Not because demand disappeared, because 50 other carriers are bidding the same route at unsustainable rates. The paradox becomes visible in Phoenix's logistics zones. New warehouse construction continues, distribution centers expand, local authorities promote the region as a growing freight hub. Yet the carriers serving those facilities are dying. Some of the hardest-hit U.S. regions by trucking bankruptcies still show strong warehouse construction and logistics investment. Truckers see infrastructure growth and operator collapse happening simultaneously. North of the border, Canada reports tight driver supply and capacity constraints. Canadian carriers complain they can't find enough drivers for cross-border runs. Meanwhile, U.S. spot rates remain depressed. American truckers sit idle. Same trade corridor. Opposite problems. Nevada, the shuttered truck stop economy. Where do drivers rest when the rest stops close? Nevada's geography makes it uniquely punishing. Interstate 80 cuts across the northern tier, 420 miles from Wendover to Reno, with vast stretches of nothing in between. Interstate 15 runs through the south, connecting Las Vegas to California and Utah. These aren't regional routes, they're transcontinental arteries. 5 years ago, truck stops dotted these corridors at predictable intervals. Fuel, food, showers, parking, the basic infrastructure that keeps long-haul operations functional. Today, those services are vanishing. Small independent stops that survived on volume can't sustain operations when traffic thins. Fewer trucks mean less fuel sold. Less fuel sold means tighter margins. Tighter margins mean closure. For drivers, this isn't economic theory. It's operational crisis. A trucker running eastbound from Sacramento to Salt Lake City used to count on stops at Fernley, Lovelock, Winnemucca, Elko. Now some of those facilities are dark. The distance between services stretches. Hours of service regulations don't adjust for infrastructure gaps. Rest area services have declined too. State budget pressures reduce maintenance. Fewer attendants, broken facilities, limited hours. Drivers witness the physical decay of the support systems they depend on to do their jobs legally and safely. Nevada sits on routes connecting California's ports to the Midwest and Texas. When a USPS contractor like 10 Roads Express phases out operations, those mail runs still happen, but the drivers who used to make them disappear. The loads get reassigned. The human infrastructure evaporates. Small communities that hosted a contractor terminal lose the economic activity. What signs of this collapse are you seeing in your area? Closed terminals, longer delivery times, fewer trucks on the road. Drop a comment with what you're witnessing. Oklahoma, the Deregulation. Echo, July 1980. The Motor Carrier Act becomes law. Deregulation opens trucking to free market competition. Entry barriers drop. Rate controls vanish. Within a decade, real weekly earnings for truckers fell 30%. Oklahoma sits at the crossroads of the national freight network. Interstate 40 runs east-west, connecting California to North Carolina. Interstate 35 runs north-south, linking Mexico to Canada. Every major transcontinental route passes through or near the state. Therefore, what happens in Oklahoma's trucking sector reflects what's happening nationwide. After deregulation, low-cost non-union carriers flooded the market. Small operators undercut established firms. Competition intensified. Margins collapsed. Carriers that survived the 1970s oil crises failed in the deregulated 1980s. The pattern wasn't cyclical, it was structural. Deregulation fundamentally altered the economics of trucking by removing pricing power from carriers and shifting it to shippers. Oklahoma truckers witnessed the transformation firsthand. Routes that supported owner-operators for decades became unprofitable overnight. Drivers who earned middle-class wages in 1979 saw their real earnings erode year after year. Today's collapse mirrors that structural shift. Between 2020 and 2021, pandemic demand created temporary pricing power. Small carriers and owner-operators entered the market. Spot rates surged, then demand normalized. Overcapacity returned. Rates collapsed. The same structural vulnerability that deregulation exposed in 1980 is playing out again in 2026. Medium-sized regional carriers face the sharpest pain. Large national firms have diversified client bases and bargaining power. Small owner-operators can operate on thin margins by avoiding overhead. Georgia, the distribution hub. Paradox. Atlanta hosts one of the nation's largest logistics footprints, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Interstate 85 and Interstate 75 intersecting. Rail hubs. Distribution centers stretching across Gwinnett, Cobb, and Fulton counties. Capital is pouring into the region. New mega warehouses rise monthly. E-commerce fulfillment centers, cold storage facilities, last-mile distribution hubs. Real estate developers promote Georgia as the Southeast's logistics gateway. Economic development agencies tout growth. The infrastructure expands. The operators serving it disappear. Truckers witness the disconnect daily. A 1.2 million square foot Amazon fulfillment center opens in Jackson County. 3 miles away, a regional carrier with 40 trucks files for bankruptcy. The facilities need freight movement, but the companies that would provide it can't survive the rate environment. Some of the hardest hit U.S. regions by trucking bankruptcies still show strong warehouse construction and logistics investment. Developers build for long-term e-commerce demand. Carriers operate on quarterly margins. The timescales don't align. Austrian research documents an unexpected cost of this infrastructure boom. Increased digital monitoring raises driver stress while operational inefficiencies remain. Telematics track every mile. Electronic logging devices record every minute. Real-time GPS monitors every stop. But the surveillance that surveils drivers doesn't fix the unpredictable waiting times at loading docks. Truckers sit for hours at facilities designed for efficiency. The surveillance is constant. The delays are endemic. Illinois, the Midwest freight collapse. Chicago is the nation's rail and truck hub. 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads converge here. Interstate 80, Interstate 90, Interstate 94, and Interstate 55 intersect within miles of each other. Every major east-west and north-south freight corridor passes through or near the city. Therefore, when national freight volumes decline, Illinois truckers see the collapse from all directions. During the 2008 to 2009 recession, for-hire trucking tonnage dropped more than 14%. Manufacturing and retail subsectors declined around 3 to 4%. Trucking amplified the broader contraction by a factor of 4. The industry doesn't just participate in economic downturns, it magnifies them. When consumer spending softens, freight demand doesn't decline proportionally, it collapses disproportionately. Retailers order less inventory, manufacturers reduce output, distribution centers slow throughput. Every reduction compounds at the carrier level. Illinois truckers witness this amplification mechanism in real time. A 5% drop in retail sales translates to a 15% drop in loads. A 10% manufacturing slowdown becomes a 30% freight reduction. The math doesn't scale linearly. It accelerates downward. Chicago's position as the intermodal capital means rail and truck declines reinforce each other. When rail volumes drop, intermodal drayage work vanishes. When long-haul trucking declines, rail loses connecting traffic. The feedback loop tightens. Carriers serving Chicago area manufacturing face compounded pressure. Industrial production in the Midwest has weakened. Steel mills reduce output. Auto parts suppliers cut shifts. Food processing plants consolidate operations. Each industrial decline eliminates trucking demand. Each carrier exit reduces capacity. But the capacity that disappears isn't the excess from the pandemic boom. It's the baseline infrastructure that existed before 2020. Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt freight drought. Interstate 80 crosses Pennsylvania for 311 miles, the same highway where J.W. Edwards launched his 1973 protest. Today, truckers rolling that corridor witness a different kind of crisis, not fuel prices, but vanishing freight. Pennsylvania's industrial base has been contracting for decades. Steel mills closed, coal mines shuttered, manufacturing plants relocated. Each closure eliminates trucking demand. Each job loss removes freight volume. The feedback loop tightens. Manufacturing decline reduces freight. Freight reduction kills carriers. Carrier exits weaken regional logistics capacity. Weakened logistics makes the region less attractive for new industrial investment. Interstate 76, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, shows the same pattern. Fewer trucks, more empty trailers, reduced way station activity. Truckers witness the physical evidence daily. Routes that sustained fleets for generations now offer sporadic loads at unprofitable rates. Medium-sized regional carriers serving Pennsylvania manufacturing clients face compounded pressure. When a steel fabricator cuts output by 20%, the carriers serving that plant lose 40% of their work. They can't raise prices to compensate. They can't diversify fast enough. They close. The collapse isn't uniform. It concentrates in carriers dependent on a handful of industrial clients. Large national firms shift capacity to growing regions. Small owner-operators reduce overhead and survive on thin margins. But mid-sized regional carriers, those with 30 to 150 trucks tied to local manufacturing, have no escape route. Pennsylvania truckers see the unraveling from the cab. The distribution center in Carlisle that used to dispatch 40 loads daily now sends 15. The warehouse in Harrisburg that operated 3 shifts now runs 1. The steel haul from Bethlehem that paid $2,800 in 2019 now bids at $1,900 if it is available at all. If industry-specific collapses hidden inside broader economic growth interest you, subscribe. These stories don't make headlines until it is too late. California, the regulatory squeeze. California moves more freight than any other state. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach handle 40% of U.S. container imports. Interstate 5 and Interstate 10 carry transcontinental freight. The Central Valley feeds agricultural products to the nation. But California's regulatory environment creates costs that carriers in other states don't face. Emission standards, equipment mandates, compliance reporting. December 2023, Germany raised its CO2-based truck toll by roughly 70% for heavy trucks. Carriers already facing declining freight volumes suddenly confronted massive operational cost increases. Margins that were thin became negative. Companies that might have survived the demand downturn failed under the regulatory cost surge. California operates a parallel squeeze. Strict emissions regulations require fleet upgrades. Operational costs rise. Demand weakens. The combination accelerates carrier exits that might survive in states with lighter regulatory burdens. A carrier operating in Nevada or Arizona can delay equipment investments during a downturn. A carrier operating in California cannot. The state's regulatory timeline does not adjust for market conditions. Compliance deadlines remain fixed regardless of freight volumes or profit margins. Germany's logistics researchers document the double squeeze, declining freight volumes and revenue, while companies must invest heavily in low-emission trucks and digital compliance systems. California carriers face the same bind. Revenues drop, regulatory costs rise, capital requirements increase precisely when cash flow contracts. Small percentage drops in California's massive freight volume translate to thousands of lost loads. A 3% decline in port throughput eliminates tens of thousands of truck movements. A 5% reduction in agricultural transport wipes out entire regional carrier fleets. Carriers serving California face compressed margins from all directions. Spot rates decline due to overcapacity. Texas, the December 2025 mass layoff. December 2025. Texas International Enterprises filed Chapter 11. 280 trucks idled. 600 drivers facing layoffs, not over months, weeks. Texas operates as the nation's freight crossroads. Interstate 10 connects California to Florida. Interstate 35 links Mexico to Canada. Interstate 20 runs coast to coast. Interstate 45 connects Houston's port to Dallas logistics hubs. Texas International served routes across this network: regional hauls, intermodal drayage, cross-border freight. When the company filed bankruptcy, 600 drivers lost work in a matter of days. The speed separates this collapse from earlier failures. Carriers used to decline over quarters. Revenues would soften. Fleets would shrink gradually. Layoffs would come in phases. Texas International went from operational to bankruptcy in weeks. This is structural demolition, not cyclical downturn, not temporary adjustment. Demolition. The drivers who lost jobs in December 2025 entered a market with no absorption capacity. Thousands of carriers already closed. Tens of thousands of drivers already displaced. Spot rates already depressed. Texas truckers witnessed the acceleration. A carrier that operated for years shuts down in weeks. Terminals that dispatched hundreds of loads daily sit empty within a month. Drivers who worked the same routes for a decade face unemployment with no comparable alternatives. The collapse isn't limited to Texas International. It's the visible manifestation of systemic failure. When one mid-sized carrier can't survive, dozens of similar carriers face identical pressure. 600 drivers, 280 trucks, 1 month. Compare that pace to the 1980s deregulation wave. Tennessee, the Yellow Corporation catastrophe. 30,000 jobs erased with Yellow Corporation's collapse. That number appeared in the cold open. Now it carries full weight. 2023. Yellow Corporation filed bankruptcy. The single largest carrier failure in modern U.S. history. 30,000 workers displaced. 12% of the entire less-than-truckload market eliminated in one stroke. Not 12% of one company's capacity. 12% of an entire market segment. Overnight. Tennessee hosted Yellow's operational epicenter. Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, Chattanooga. Terminals that processed thousands of shipments daily went dark within weeks. Drivers who worked the same routes for decades received termination notices. Freight that moved through Yellow's network for generations had nowhere to go. The scale separates Yellow from every other failure in this list. Texas International idled 280 trucks. Yellow idled thousands. 10 Roads Express phased out operations over months. Yellow collapsed in weeks. The concentration is the revelation. One company held 12% of an entire market. One bankruptcy reshaped national freight capacity. One failure displaced 30,000 workers simultaneously. Tennessee truckers witnessed the epicenter. Terminals they drove past daily for years suddenly chained shut. Colleagues they worked alongside for decades suddenly unemployed. Shippers they served for generations suddenly scrambling for alternatives. The industry had consolidated to the point where a single failure could eliminate over 10% of market capacity in a critical segment. Freight still moved. Competitors absorbed some volume. Shippers found alternatives. The system adapted. But 30,000 workers faced a market already shedding jobs. They entered unemployment during a period when carriers were closing, not hiring. Their skills remained relevant. Their experience remained valuable. The demand for their labor had vanished. The 10 states reveal a common thread: Arizona's overcapacity, Nevada's infrastructure decay, Oklahoma's deregulation echo, Georgia's distribution paradox, Illinois's amplified contraction, Pennsylvania's industrial feedback loop, California's regulatory squeeze, Texas's accelerating demolition. Tennessee's market segment elimination. This is structural demolition, not cyclical downturn. The difference is permanent. Cyclical downturns recover. Structural demolition removes capacity that doesn't return. For truckers rolling through these states, the collapse isn't abstract. It's the closed terminal in Memphis where they used to pick up loads, the shuttered truck stop in Reno where they used to fuel. Save this if you work in logistics, transportation, or supply chain. You will want to reference the data when this accelerates. December 3rd, 1973. J.W. Edwards pulled onto Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania and ignited a nationwide shutdown. That crisis was triggered by fuel prices. The men who drive these roads know what the early signs look like. 10 states, 10 different manifestations of the same structural demolition. Arizona's overcapacity correction, Nevada's infrastructure decay, Oklahoma's deregulation echo, Georgia's distribution paradox, Illinois's amplified contraction, Pennsylvania's industrial feedback loop, California's regulatory squeeze, Texas's accelerating timeline, Tennessee's market segment elimination. The pattern isn't cyclical, it's structural. Cyclical downturns recover when demand returns. Structural demolition removes capacity permanently. The carriers closing now won't reopen when freight volumes improve. The drivers displaced now won't return when rates recover. The terminals shuttered now won't restart operations when the market stabilizes. 1979. Trucking violence escalated during the fuel price crisis. Governors of 9 states called out National Guard troops. The industry fought back visibly. Highways shut down. Commerce stopped. Today's collapse is quiet. No highway blockades, no National Guard deployments, no visible protests. The system adapted to function without the workers it's eliminating. Freight still moves. Warehouses still operate. Consumers still receive deliveries. The supply chain proves it can shed tens of thousands of workers and thousands of carriers while maintaining basic functionality. The question truckers are asking: how much capacity can the system shed before it cannot absorb the next disruption? The efficiency gains come at the cost of resilience. The redundancy that once cushioned shocks is gone. The flexible capacity that used to handle surges does not exist. The system proved it can function without tens of thousands of workers and thousands of carriers, but systems built for efficiency, not resilience. Fracture under pressure. They were not designed to absorb. The collapse is quiet now. The question is, what happens when it is not?